Hey everybody, and welcome to Doge's Emporium of Tabletop RPG Cringe. In today's episode of RPG Horror Stories, we have a tale about a game master from a Shadowrun game simping for a player. A story about a player who has rigid ideas for D&D characters, and more. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. There Are Never Consequences for Me, Shadowrun 5e, by Reddit user The Bastard King 21. The dreaded killer of parties, scheduling issues, had left me without my usual friend group to play games with. With almost all of my games on hiatus or dead, I decided to go looking for some non-D&D or Pathfinder systems that I liked, and give a few new ones a go. In particular, I wanted to try Shadowrun again, as it has been years since I played, and I remembered trying it. Shadowrun games are less common, so I jumped on the first one I could find. Now, here's something to know about me. I do not quit games. I do not miss sessions. I have shown up after being hospitalized that day, and I have put up with a fair amount of crap. But given how much I hate people randomly no-showing or quitting, I make it a point to never do so myself. On the flip side, because I stick it out for the long run, I do not put up with people's shit, and will call them out on it pretty quickly. This is the story of the first game I ever quit. So here's our cast of players. I don't actually remember their names, except the horror character, so I will be making them up. Johnson. For those familiar with Shadowrun, this is the GM. Me. I was playing Phantom, my hitman who specializes in explosives, toxins, and drug use. Gruff, the group's hacker and driver. In character was a human in his mid-50s, and an ex-cybersecurity cop or something. Newbie, person who joined the same session as me. And Horror, actually an apt name, because she actually had some sort of edgelord name. Don't remember what it was, just that I heard the name and thought, wow, $10 says they are a rogue sitting in the corner brooding. She was playing a vampire mage. For those who do not know Shadowrun, vampires are kill on sight. You are supposed to do everything possible to avoid being known as a vampire. Additionally, mages, when they cast, leave behind an astral signature that is basically a magical fingerprint. This comes up later. So, the first session was me, Horror, Gruff, and Newbie. Horror was very much a spotlight hog. She talked over everyone, and she always seemed to have a solution to her problem, even while sitting around with people who were specialized in the task and could have done it better. Shadowrun is a game of specialists. You generally never have to worry about being the best at your job. Your character exists to hyperfocus, so the fact that she tried to do every job herself was very out of place. Swiss Army knife characters are typically just bad at everything. She got on my nerves constantly, and I talked to people after the session to make sure that I was not overreacting. Gruff said that I was right, and was justified in how I felt. Okay, could be a bad session, so I was going to wait for the next issue, but nothing was so egregious that it needed to be addressed immediately. I asked why there were 2 spots open, and found out that 2 people just stopped showing up. Okay, that is a serious red flag. The next time it came up as an issue, I was going to bring it up. The second session comes, and Newbie no-shows. We go on with the game because we didn't need a speciality for that session. We get into a fight at the Stuffer Shack. Think gas station with a restaurant. Some Yakuza come in with SMGs and start firing at us. My character immediately drops jazz. For my D&D players, think of it as haste, but in drug form. Now, Jazz, at my level, was giving me 4d6 plus 12 initiative total, and then she rolls initiative, 5d6 plus 23. For D&D players, that is like an out-of-gen character having plus 20 initiative and getting 3 extra actions per turn. My character, on his turn, dropped some gas grenades, non-lethal stuff so the civilians would not die, as Shadowrun is all about keeping yourself a secret, as you are a criminal. Killing civilians is a quick way to go from criminal to terrorist, and having a lot of attention drawn on you. The Yakuza's turn comes up, and they just unload their SMGs into us, Horror has something insane, like 16 dice to defend, and when they do hit her, full auto reduces the dodge by a lot, she has over 30 dice in armor. To translate for D&D players, Shadowrun has a lower AC. It's lower to hit, but higher DR. If this was 5e, she would have about 22 AC, and a DR 15. She could literally no-sell multiple enemies, unloading automatic fire into her. On her turn, she proceeds to cast Fireball at an insanely high force and kill everyone in the Stuffer Shack, except us. She literally did the classic, I walk into a tavern and cast Fireball, in a game that is supposed to be Black Trenchcoat, never get caught. So, I confront her and point out how much of a problem that is. First off, Stuffer Shack is owned by one of the 10 most powerful corporations in the world. They have surveillance, and they are not going to tolerate you blowing up one of their stores and killing everyone inside. Additionally, she cast her spells at such a high force that it would take hours for her signature to fade away. She just blew up a building, the cops were on their way, and they were going to find her signature. Then I asked how the hell she had 5d6 initiative die and 30 armor without casting spells. She told me that at the beginning of the day, she casted a spell, pre-edged, and just sustained it all day. I was like, hold up. First off, there is no way your dice can be high enough that you cast those spells, sustained them, and then kept dodging and fighting like that. Again, for non-Shadowrun players, buffs have to be sustained by concentration, similar to 5e. However, it doesn't stop you from doing other actions. You just take a -2 penalty per spell that you are sustaining. Second, even with the pre-edge, she is walking around with so many powerful spells up that she is basically glowing like a lighthouse on the astral. Not only does she have a clear, glowing trail leading to her from where she came, but random astral entities should be paying attention to her, and that is usually a negative. And that was on top of the fact that the cops were going to be able to find her with this massive amount of mana she was leaking with her signature. No self-preserving criminal would run a job with someone who was leaving that much of a trail. She simply replies with, "Oh, don't worry, there are never consequences for me." At that point, it wasn't Shadowrun. She was literally playing a murder hobo, and the DM was just letting her. I asked Newbie why he quit, and he confirmed that it was because of horror. I asked Gruff, and that's when I found out the previous people quit because of horror too, and he told me she gets away with it because the GM was simping for her. I checked the GM's games and find out she is in every single game he runs, so I confronted her and the GM, and she argued with me about me being wrong and that none of that stuff is relevant. I told her that she was the reason that everyone else quit, and that she got unfair treatment because the GM was into her. She said that I couldn't even say that because Newbie had only been gone for one session, and I never met the previous people. I told her that she was so terrible that it wasn't hard to get confirmations, and I quit. I further confirmed with Gruff and found out that I was the only person to last 2 sessions beside him, and he didn't blame me for leaving. He was on his 4th. That game came up as needing new players every 2 weeks as I looked for new Shadowrun games. Then, as I looked for other games, I noticed a lot of games that she was in needed new players often. It's the kind of thing you don't notice until you're looking for it. It sucks because the DM was actually pretty good for the story and job detail aspect. Anyway, that is the story of the first game I ever quit. Yeah, it definitely sounds like there was some major simpage going on there. I've never played Shadowrun on tabletop, only the video games, so OP making comparisons to 5e was really helpful in understanding what was going on there. I just don't understand how Horror didn't realize it was out of place to have her character be so OP, and not realize that the DM was into her, or how they couldn't formulate that there may be a specific reason why those games keep losing players. Though, no, it can't be her, it's everyone else that is wrong. Hopefully OP eventually found a decent game of Shadowrun to play in. But let's move on. Even Tiny Red Flags Are Still Red, by Reddit user Zarunuk. Let me preface this by saying it is a mild one. I run a weekly game, going on 4 months now, and I was looking to increase the number of players. A few weeks in, we had lost a couple players for scheduling reasons, and I decided to look for a couple new players to expand the party. We have a great party dynamic going that I really want to nurture and let grow, so I was being especially picky with who I recruit. The setting is a clockpunk nautical adventure in a world of wild magic with some mild cosmic horror elements. Think Pirates of the Caribbean, crossed with Shadow over Innsmouth. I was running this time with D&D 5e rules, but I have used other systems for it before, and it is my 4th game set in this world. I interviewed a guy who was very rigid in his character concepts. If I'm playing a druid, it must be a tabaxi. I told him that we don't have tabaxi in this setting, but we have Vanara, a Pathfinder race. But this was not sufficient. I offered some ways that his backstory could be related to the current plotline. No, this unnamed background character must have my best interest at heart, and cannot be secretly evil. Finally, we get a character built that fits the setting and matches one of his pre-built character concepts. If I play a tiefling, it must be gin-packed warlock, with the fisherman background, but he cannot own a boat. I tell him that the town we are starting in is based on 1600s England, so use that as a naming guideline. But he names his character something like, whoa, that's complicated. La Falafaliel Token Elfsianil. Well, I tried. So I suggest that maybe his character's family came from another country, but he gets pissed at me and throws a fit over it. Really, dude? What's wrong with being an immigrant? I'm one in real life. It was at this point that I kicked him. If he was going to be this rigid over every little detail, then what was he going to be like to play with? He also constantly rattled off details about the Forgotten Realms, despite me saying multiple times that this was not in that setting. This isn't really a big explosive story, but they usually aren't. Sometimes a player is just not a good fit. Though this one made me wonder, was I being unreasonable? I told my party about what happened, and they mostly agreed with my assessment. Someone like that would probably be hard to play with. Now, I can understand having a set idea of character ideas, but this player just went overboard with it. When you're joining a game, especially one in a homebrew setting, you have to have some wiggle room and collaborate with the DM. I don't think OP did anything wrong in kicking this player before they even started, as I agree this player would be a major pain in the ass to play with. And before we get into the final story of the day, if you're enjoying the video, consider rolling a crit on that like button and leaving a comment, as those things really help the channel out a lot. Right, Nipsey?
Yes. And remember to subscribe and click the bell. Attack.
Thanks, buddy. But, with that said, let's get right into the story. DM forgets about the new guy. By Reddit user, Kaitos Bomber. After many years of D&D and Pathfinder, I collected my own share of horror stories. This is one where I was a player. I'll keep it as short as possible because it's kind of mild, and at the end of the day, these people aren't really horrible. It's just that the experience itself was bad. I got recruited into a 3.5 game many years ago, somewhere between 9th and 12th level, so I apologize if I forget some details. During character creation, I was bouncing ideas with the DM about what I could play. I posted some character ideas, like Monk, Fighter, and Druid, and the DM asked me if I was making bad choices intentionally, before I pointed out that I rarely play. It's also the time I was introduced to the tier list. After browsing through the tier list, I decided to make a cleric of Obad High, the neutral god of nature, for those wondering, and focused on summoning. The DM told me that I should pick other spells since there's a necromancer in the party, a dread necromancer most likely, and that they had a bunch of minions with them, and adding more would be stressful. That was the first red flag in hindsight, but I didn't see it that way at the time. If you're going to allow minions, they shouldn't be restricted to just one person in my opinion. Whatever, I finally get to be a player, I said to myself. The game starts, and the party was in the middle of a dungeon, so the only hook available was that I was captured by the enemy, and the party found me in a room. I had asked the DM about my gear before the session started, but he said, "Don't worry about it, you'll find your gear later." Alright, cool. At least I have my healing spells. I didn't have a component pouch with me, as I was stripped to bare essentials, but I should still be plenty useful. I don't recall the party composition much, but I do remember there being a warblade that demolished the monsters, and the aforementioned necromancer, who had some minions, including an Athach zombie. Each session would last about 3 hours, with nothing but combat and very little role-playing in between. I would ask the DM before each session if we were getting closer to getting some gear for my character, as the party had their share of swag, but at best, he would give me some vague answer. The party got to be super useful, while I did nothing most of each session. Though, admittedly, I did roll a cleric, so high dex wasn't high on my priority list. I decided to leave after the 3rd session, after more of the same happened. To the DM's credit, he had a strict application process because he considered his current group first and foremost, and he did send me a doc about the lore of the world, so at least I wasn't entirely oblivious to what was going on, and he did discuss each application with his group before they finally picked me. It was just that, after being in the same dungeon for a total of 9 hours, with hardly any developments, to the point of literally being driven to sleep, vague answers about the role I'd play other than Healbot, and the party didn't really need healing most of the time, and trying to cultivate bonds with the party with little result. It just felt like I wasn't part of the group, and I thought I had better things to do than sit around doing nothing. Edit. I realized that limiting my spells was not much of a red flag, and I personally wouldn't have made a big deal out of that if I could do literally anything else. I went back and read the messages after much digging to fact-check everything I said, and I remember my first suggestion being a dirge singer in mourning for his fiancée. It was an evil campaign. He then pointed out that there was already a bard and a necromancer, so then came my other suggestions, in which he proceeded to ask me if I was intentionally making bad choices. In hindsight, I should have asked him if he really needed another player after the first session, because with support, minions, and uber-strong frontliners taken care of, did they really need me? Well, honestly, my first impression of this DM is that it sounded like he was a bit of a dick. Especially with the passive-aggressive way that he asked OP if he was purposely making bad decisions. Though, I can understand a DM not wanting to deal with another summoner with minions, as that can add a lot more stress when it comes to balancing encounters. But then to introduce OP's cleric without any gear, and then not having them find the gear for 3 full sessions is a bit overkill. I can understand narratively why the character wouldn't have his things, but for the sake of making the player not feel useless, have it be found in a bag or something soon after. So I don't blame OP for not wanting to go back after that. And that will do it for today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may all of your rolls be natural 20s. Until next time.